Ella's fingers trembled as she locked the door behind her, her breath shallow and uneven. She had made it her first apartment in Seattle. It wasn't much, just a small studio tucked in a building not far from the city center. But it was hers. For the first time in her life, it felt like freedom. The soft hum of the city beyond her windows was a lullaby of independence. But even in this moment of exhilaration, a small voice whispered in the back of her mind, reminding her of the chains she had barely escaped. She thought of her mother, Madeline, how she used to keep Ella's life under a microscope. No sleepovers, no runs, no room for rebellion. Madeline's rule was ironclad from the moment Ella could remember, and for years she'd been trapped in the suffocating grip of that control. Ella had never been allowed to make a single decision for herself. Even her college choice had been dictated by Madeline. She'd wanted a vibrant city, a campus that pulsed with life. But instead, her mother had pushed her to small, conservative school closer to home. Madeline believed she knew best. Ella's desires were nothing more than childish whims in her eyes. And so, after graduation, Ella had seized the chance to move. Seattle was an escape, but the weight of her past was not so easily shaken off. It started slowly. Odd calls that went unanswered, texts from unknown numbers, the creeping sensation that something was wrong, but she pushed it aside. Perhaps it was the remnants of her overbearing childhood, but the unease clung to her like a shadow. She told herself it was just paranoia, born from a lifetime of being watched. But then Mr. Baxter, her neighbor, knocked on her door one evening. He was a quiet man, a graphic designer who kept to himself. Ella had never thought much of him, but his expression that night was different: worry, almost fear. "Mia, I need to talk to you for a second," he said, voice hushed. Ella felt her stomach tighten, sensing the gravity in his tone. "What is it?" she asked, her pulse quickening. "I've been watching someone outside your apartment," Mr. Baxter continued, his eyes dark with concern. "They've been acting suspicious. I thought you should know." Ella froze. Her first instinct was to dismiss it. People came and went. Nothing ever seemed out of place. But his certainty made her pause. I'll check," she muttered, trying to steady her breathing. Her mind raced as she unlocked her door. Her apartment looked fine. It felt fine. But as she moved through it, the eerie stillness only deepened her unease. Then she saw it. On the coffee table, a purse that wasn't hers. Sleek, expensive, and out of place. Her heart skipped as she reached for it, dread building in her chest. Inside the purse was a note. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the message. "I'm sorry, Mia, I had to come. I've been watching you. I needed to know if you were okay. Love, Mom." Ella's breath caught in her throat. Her mother had found her. She had been tracking her. The purse, a gift from Madeline years ago, was now revealed as the device of her surveillance. Her mind reeled. She turned to Mr. Baxter, anger swelling in her chest. "My mother. She's been tracking me. I can't believe she's done this." Mr. Baxter's face was filled with sympathy. "I'm so sorry, Mia, that's an invasion. You don't deserve that." For the first time in years, Ella felt a surge of raw emotion: betrayal, anger, and something darker she hadn't known she was capable of feeling. She needed to confront her mother. She had to. The next day, Ella's nerves were raw as she stood in front of the shabby apartment where her mother lived. It was only a few blocks from the house where Ella had spent her childhood, but the place seemed miles away. The small, rundown building was a far cry from the imposing mansion Madeline had once presided over in their old town. But Ella knew her mother well enough to see past the exterior. Madeline's control had been just as oppressive, even within these crumbling walls. Ella's hand trembled as she knocked on as tight as ever, and Ella's presence here now was bound to trigger something more dangerous than mere anger. She rang the doorbell with a shaking finger, and it took only moments before the door swung open. Madeline stood there, her face hard and unreadable, but her eyes, the eyes that had once held all of Ella's hopes and dreams, were filled with an emotion Ella couldn't place. "What are you doing here, Mia?" Madeline's voice was cold, clipped, as though this meeting were a mere inconvenience. "I'm not Mia anymore," Ella said, her words sharp. "I'm Ella, and I'm not going to let you control me anymore." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the years of silence, of resentment that Ella had kept buried deep within her. For a long moment, Madeline didn't speak. She just stood there, her eyes scanning Ella, assessing her. Then, finally, she sighed, her breath heavy with the weight of things unsaid. "I didn't want to do it," Madeline said, her voice soft, almost pleading. "But I had no choice. You were slipping away, Mia. I had to know you were safe." "Safe?" Ella's voice cracked, the tension rising as she took a step forward. "You've been spying on me, Mom. Tracking me like I'm some kind of criminal. I'm not a child anymore. I'm not your property." Madeline's face twisted in a mix of hurt and defiance. "I did it because I love you. Because I care. You think I wanted to see you leave? To watch you walk out of my life like it was nothing. I did what I had to do to protect you." "You don't get to protect me by suffocating me," Ella shot back, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You've controlled me my whole life. Every decision, every dream, hell, every friendship has been yours, not mine." Madeline's gaze faltered, the weight of Ella's words hitting harder than any physical blow could. I only wanted what was best for you. You're so much like your father," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. Ella's heart clenched at the mention of her father, a man she barely remembered, a shadow of a figure whose absence had defined so much of her childhood. Madeline had always blamed his departure on Ella, as though his leaving was somehow her fault. "I don't want to hear about him," Ella said, her voice tight with emotion. "This isn't about him. It's about you. And it's about me." Madeline's lips trembled. "I'm sorry, Mia. I don't know how to let you go. I never have." "I'm not yours to keep, Mom," Ella whispered, the finality of her words sinking in. "I'm my own." With that, Ella turned away, walking out of the apartment and into the cool Seattle air, her chest heaving with the weight of what had just transpired. For a moment, she felt empty, like a void had opened up between her and everything she had ever known. But then, in that emptiness, she felt something else, a strange, exhilarating sense of freedom. For the first time in her life, Ella knew what it meant to truly stand on her own. Ella's apartment had never felt quieter. After the confrontation with her mother, there was nothing but silence. It was a silence that filled every corner of her mind, every crevice of her life. She hadn't expected it to be easy, but the weight of the decision was heavier than she had imagined. For years, her mother's voice had been the loudest in her life, guiding every choice she made. Now, she had no one to guide her but herself. She busied herself with the small tasks of daily life, organizing her space and getting used to the quiet. But they hadn't spent much time together, but Ella had come to value his support in ways she hadn't expected. Mr. Baxter wasn't just a neighbor. He was a reminder that there were still people who cared, people who didn't want anything from her, except to see her happy. One evening, as she was packing a box of things from her old life that no longer felt like hers, she heard a soft knock on the door. She opened it to find Mr. Baxter standing there, his expression kind yet serious. "I thought you might need a hand with this," he said, gesturing toward the boxes scattered across her living room. "You've been quiet, too quiet." Ella managed a small smile, a mix of gratitude and sadness in her eyes. "I've been processing. It's been a lot." "I can only imagine," he replied gently. "It's a big step, cutting ties with the past. But you're doing it. You're really doing it." She nodded slowly, unsure of how to express the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "It feels like I'm standing on the edge of something, but I don't know what's next." "There's freedom in that," Mr. Baxter said. "I've seen it in a lot of people, especially when they finally step away from what holds them back. It's terrifying at first, but it's also exhilarating." Ella looked at him, feeling a warmth in his words that she hadn't expected. Mr. Baxter wasn't just offering a hand with moving boxes, he was offering a perspective she hadn't thought of. It wasn't just about escaping her mother's grip, it was about finding something new, something that was her own. "I don't know where I'm going," Mr. Baxter smiled, his eyes kind with understanding. "You don't have to have it all figured out yet. Life doesn't give us all the answers in one go. It's about taking the next step, even when you don't know what's on the other side. Sometimes, that's the only way forward." Ella took a deep breath, feeling the truth in his words. For the first time in a long time, the weight of her past didn't seem as overwhelming. She could breathe easier, knowing that she had the power to move forward on her own terms. The chains her mother had wrapped around her were breaking, piece by piece, and though the process was painful, it was also liberating. "Thank you," she said quietly, grateful for his steady presence. "No need to thank me," he replied with a shrug. "I'm just here to help. But I think you're going to be okay, Ella. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." She gave him a small, appreciative smile, then turned back to the boxes. They worked in silence for a while, packing and organizing the remnants of Ella's old life. Each item felt like another weight lifted off her shoulders, another step away from the woman she used to be. As they finished, Mr. Baxter helped her carry the boxes down to her car. Before he left, he paused at her doorstep, his expression more serious now. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you," he said, his voice low. "You're not alone in this. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. I know what it's like to be in a place where you feel like the world's turned upside down. But it gets better. You'll see." Ella looked at him, her heart full of gratitude and something deeper in understanding of the kind of person Mr. Baxter was. Someone who had been through his own battles but still chose to reach out and help others. She didn't know where this path would lead her, but she knew that, for the first time in her life, she wasn't walking it alone. Weeks passed. Ella settled into a routine, carving out space for herself in ways she never had before. Her job at the tech company was challenging but invigorating, offering her the sense of purpose she'd been craving. She made new friends, people who saw her as an individual, not just the daughter of Madeline. She found herself laughing more, relaxing more, and most importantly, living more. But the shadow of her mother remained. No matter how much Ella tried to push it away, there were still moments when the ache of Madeline's absence and the unresolved tension between them reared its head. Ella thought of the letter she had written, the one she had sent to Madeline, telling her mother that their relationship needed to end for her own well-being. Ella had written those words with a sense of finality, but every so often she wondered if she had done the right thing. Was severing ties truly the best choice? One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Ella sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, the glow of the city lights outside casting a soft, peaceful light over her apartment. She thought about the future, the path she was creating for herself, free from her mother's control. She thought of the boundaries she had set, the way she had taken her life back, piece by piece. And then, as she sat there, her phone buzzed. Ella's heart skipped when she saw the name on the screen. It was Madeline, her mother. For a moment, Ella hesitated. Her breath caught, and she found herself frozen, unsure of how to respond. It had been weeks since the confrontation, since the severance, since the final letter. What did this call mean? Was it another attempt to manipulate? A plea for forgiveness? With trembling hands, Ella answered the call. "Ella," Madeline's voice came through, shaky and soft. "I've been thinking. I know I've made mistakes. But I love you. Please, I need to know you're okay." Ella's heart thudded in her chest. The temptation to fall back into old patterns, to respond out of obligation, out of guilt was there. But she had to resist. This was her moment, her chance to take a final stand. "I'm fine, Mom," Ella said, her voice steady but firm. "I'm doing well. I'm living my life on my own terms. And that's something you can't take from me anymore." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Madeline didn't speak. Then, finally, her voice cracked. "I just want you to be happy, Mia. I want to fix things." "I don't need fixing," Ella replied, her voice soft now but resolute. "I need to be free." Another silence passed, this one heavier, filled with the weight of years of unspoken emotions. "Goodbye, Mom," Ella said quietly, before ending the call. And for the first time, Ella felt a true sense of peace. The final tie had been severed. The past had been let go. As the days turned into weeks, Ella's life continued to unfold in ways she had never imagined. She explored new hobbies, traveled on her own, and grew into the person she had always wanted to be. There were still challenges, of course, but she faced them with a strength she hadn't known was hers to claim. In the quiet of her apartment, surrounded by the life she had built from the ground up, Ella knew one thing for certain: she had found her way. The future was hers to create, and for the first time she felt free. So if you love this story, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and comment below. Your interaction helps us grow.